Okay, I'm going to read what song Earth evolved. Coffee is hot, so I work moderately. On viruses, how loose strands of genetic code swarmed across the early Earth, inserting themselves into all forms of life, past, present, and future. Influenza family Osuomyxoviridae species influenza virus A, ranked 9, one of humanity's biggest ever killers. In 1798, English economist Thomas Malthus predicted the imminent decimation of human populations by sickly seasons, epidemics, pestilence, and plague that advance in telegraphic array and sweep off their thousands and tens of thousands. This alarming prophecy was founded on the rapid rise of the human population. Not long after Malthus wrote his famous essay, the number of humans inhabiting the Earth rose past the 1 billion mark. Just over 200 years later, the human population stands at nearly 7 billion, with approximately 211,000 extra bodies added every day. Nothing could be better for viruses, whose single concern is to copy their code into as many other creatures as possible. All living organisms from bacteria, plants, and fungi to animals fish and humans are vulnerable to infection by viruses, so great is their variety. Influenza viruses infect a wide range of creatures, including humans, pigs, birds, seals, mosquitoes, salmon, and sea lice. At some point in the last few thousand years, a variant of this virus family skipped across the species barrier and mutated, allowing it to spread from human to human. Its job was made much easier by the closer proximity between humans and animals that resulted from the rise of animal domestication and farming. Beginning about 10,000 years ago, the influenza virus spreads by causing its host to erupt into severe bout of coughing and sneezing. In dense human populations, copies of the influenza viruses are easily splattered from person to person in airborne droplets. The human immune system is usually able to overcome these infections within 2 or 3 weeks. Old and young people are at greater risk of severe illness. On average, one person dies out of every 1,000 infected. Since Malthus wrote his essay, More than 100 million people worldwide are thought to have died from various strains of flu. By far, the worst outbreak came between 1918 and 1920, when between 50 million and 100 million people fell victim. This was more than double the number of soldiers slaughtered in World War I, which ended just as the influenza outbreak got underway. The epidemic, which struck first in the United States, had a truly global impact. It spread throughout Europe and Asia, as far north as the Eskimo populations of the Arctic and west to the remote Pacific Islands. Yet it came to be called Spanish flu, mainly because newspaper reports about its progress were least censored in Spain, which was not involved in the war effort and therefore had no ministry of propaganda, giving rise to the mistaken impression that the disease had Spanish origins. A new strain of bird flu, H5N1, evolved in Asia between 1999 and 2002. However, it has had a limited effect on humans because this strain can be transmitted only from birds to humans, but not human to human, thereby restricting the risk of infection to those people who live or work in close proximity to birds. Nevertheless, an outbreak of another influenza variant, H1N1, originating in an outbreak of another influenza variant, oh, H1N1 originating in pigs, has since migrated throughout the world. Its easy spread from human to human caused this trend to be officially declared a global pandemic by the World Health Organization in the summer of 2009. International efforts to contain the spread of this so-called swine flu were a conspicuous failure. It is a worrying sign. Viruses have an extraordinary capacity for genetic diversity and change. The copying process used by influenza, which is based on RNA chemical replications, makes errors far more often than the more sophisticated DNA genetic copying processes used in plant and animal cells. More errors mean more mutations, leading leading to the potential evolution of highly infectious lethal strains that can easily pass from human to human, turning each new victim into a deadly carrier of the disease. Mass immunization may or may not be effective, since precise countermeasures cannot be designed until it is known exactly how the virus has mutated. Knowledge that can be gathered only after a new strain of the virus has struck. Mass production of a suitable vaccine would take at least 3 months, by which time mutant strains of such an influenza virus could be wiping out tens, if not hundreds, of millions of people. Mars may have got his timing wrong, but in our overcrowded modern world, and with highly infectious diseases like influenza, his prediction is as pertinent today as ever. HIV, AIDS, Polyretroviridie species human immunodeficiency virus 1 and 2, rank 77. A most perplexing and fast-spreading disease with no obvious cure. People who live in and around Cape Town lead desperate lives. Their sorry story, which is repeated for millions or more who live in other southern African cities, began 30 years ago when a devastating viral infection skipped across the species barrier from monkeys to humans. No one quite knows exactly how or when the HIV virus claimed its first human victim, but it is thought that the incurable illness that stems from its infection, called AIDS, has no far claimed uh, more than 25 million lives in 25 years, with at least another 60 million infected. HIV is today's best known but least understood virus. As a member of the retrovirus family, its ingenious tactics for splicing its own genetic code into the genes of its human host are the product of billions of years of evolution. That's why, despite enormous advances in developing a vaccine for many of the most devastating human diseases, there's still no cure for HIV, nor is there likely to be one anytime soon. Viruses like HIV propagate so fast and make so many copying errors in the process that they are usually able to outwit vaccines. After infecting its host through bodily fluids such as blood, semen, saliva, or breast milk, HIV mutates into so many different forms that the human immune system can't keep up. In many people, the HIV infection can be contained by the body's defenses for only about 1 year. Also, this can be greatly extended with the help of modern antiviral drugs. Eventually, however, the virus comes up with a new variant that the body's defenses cannot circumvent. It then duplicates madly, wrecking what left of its human host's disease-fighting systems. This arises from other normally benign infections, such as the common cold, because the body has become too weak to ward them off. A few people are naturally immune to HIV. A recent study has tried to explain why about 10% of the European population benefit from a special type of mutation that is able to combat the spread of HIV. Research indicates that this mutation is present in human populations that suffered outbreaks of bubonic plague between AD 1000 and 1800. Viral hemorrhagic fever uh, is first thought to have appeared about 2,500 years ago, but infections became pandemic in Europe only after AD 1000, peaking with the Black Death in the mid-14th century. Unfortunately, today's human population in sub-Saharan Africa has no history of medieval bubonic plague. This infection has therefore gained its strongest grip in a place where natural human immunity is weakest. Experts also believe that for billions of years viruses like HIV may have been instrumental in triggering the appearance of new species. It is interesting in speculating on what would happen on the human population in Africa in the absence of modern social, educational, or technological intervention. Eventually, the entire continent will become infected with HIV, and all except for the few people with natural immunity would perish. It would be left to these immune survivors to repopulate the continent. But new population would differ from the old one in genetic makeup by having a benign HIV signature in their genes. A signature that would effectively have been added to the ranks of these people's junk DNA. Since human populations on other continents would not be able to breed with surviving African humans without themselves becoming infected, at least two isolated populations of humans would emerge. Those with HIV in Africa and those without HIV in the rest of the world. The inability to interbreed between these populations means they would eventually evolve into different human species. Only about 1% of African adults have so far been tested for HIV, so true infection rates are still largely unknown, making its future impact impossible to predict. In the absence of a vaccine or other cure, the disease continues to accelerate, devastating the social and economic lives of millions, the majority of whom live in the poorest part of Africa and India. In 2007, an estimated 2.1 million humans died of AIDS, 330,000 of them children under the age of 15. South Africa has more than 1 million orphaned children, themselves HIV infected. Thanks to the passage of the virus from mother to child via breast milk. Meanwhile, in neighboring Botswana, average human life expectancy has plummeted from 65 years in 1988 to 35 in 2007. Despite advances in modern medicine, the impact of HIV infection on sub-Saharan Africa today puts it squarely alongside history's most devastating viral pandemics: avian influenza and smallpox. Potyvirus. Family Potyviridae. Species Potyvirus sp. rank 100. How a plant virus caused the first stock market crash. Plants are just as susceptible to infection by viruses as humans, animals, fungi, or bacteria. Less well known is how one virus had a significant impact on the birth of botany, horticulture, and capitalism in the history of early modern Europe. Potyviridae is the largest of the 34 known plant virus families. It comprises about 180 members that together account for 30% of all recorded plant viruses. These parasites are not expert in sneakily copying their own genetic code into the DNA of their host, nor do they spread by direct contact between one plant and another. Instead, these viruses employ the same technique for their reproduction as many plants use for pollination. They hitch lift from a flying passerby. The potyvirus uses the transportation of a species of insect called the green peach aphid, scattering from plant to plant. These small creatures have spread potyviruses all over the world. They ride on the back of winds that blow them hundreds of miles across land and sea, and there's not a single region of the world that is not now affected by the viral infections they carry. Plants most at risk from damage include potatoes, turnips, and plums, and in most cases, once infected, their fruit or tubular production becomes seriously impaired. However, Potyviridae's biggest impact on human history comes from one variant that ably demonstrates how viral infection can sometimes turn out to be highly beneficial for the survival prospect of its host species. Tulips originated in Central Asia. They grow naturally in the mountainous regions of Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan. Long admired by Islamic Sultanate, these flowers were brought to Europe in the late 16th century by a Flemish doctor called Carolus, who was also responsible for running the Imperial Medicinal Garden in Vienna. In 1593, when he moved to Leiden, southern Holland, he took with him the bulbs of some especially attractive tulips. As if by magic, some of the plants flowered with a highly distinctive flaming pattern that unfurled across their petals like marbled paper. No one knew why most tulips stayed a single, monotonous shade while persons who broke into such a feast of whimsical streaks and stripes. The powerful allure of these exotic varieties among Dutch traders meant that for a while, tulip became the most sought after valuable commodity money could buy. So feverish did the Dutch appetite for tulips become the contract for flowers due to be harvested in the autumn of 1635 were sold for more than the price of a house. The most celebrated was the vivid variety Semper Augustus, painted in all its majesty of famous Dutch artists of the day. A dozen or so samples, owned by one tulip collector, Dr. Adrian Howe, accounted for almost the entire world's supply, so rare was this stunning beauty. Despite numerous offers throughout the 1620s, Powell refused to sell his collection at any price. When a single Semper Augustus bow finally came up for auction, it sold for a record 6,000 florins, about €1 million today. Prices like these were driven by scarcity, even though tulip flowers are capable of producing up to 200 seeds a year. They hardly ever pass on their striking looks to their offspring. For an explanation, oh no. The only way to ensure a fossil crop of similarly patterned plants is to take a take offcuts from the original plant, a form of cloning. And annoyingly, for Dutch growers, it seemed that the more beautiful the tulip, the weaker and less numerous were its bulb from which offcut could be cultivated, partly explaining why prices shot through the roof. It wasn't until the invention of the rapture microscope in the 1920s that scientists discovered that a virus prevented the production of the certain petal pigments, causing the color to flake. Only then was the mystery of why some tulips had such stunning looks resolved, and the link between virus aphid had such stunning looks uh, resolved, and the link between virus, aphid, and tulip finally pieced together. The tulip speculated bubble finally burst in the spring of 1637. Gamblers who had promised to pay thousands of florins for that year's harvest were left with nothing, and those who had bought tulips the previous year for vast sums saw their fortunes evaporate overnight. Some historians claim it took years for the Dutch economy to recover from tulip mania. Others say its impact has been overhyped. From the 1920s onwards, the virus was systematically eradicated by Dutch farmers anxious to increase the yields of their tulip crop by producing hybrids of other species. Similar visual effects to those originally produced by the virus could be cultivated for less cost, time, and effort. Yet, it is a fascinating and significant historical fact that the plant virus was instrumental in creating the first ever speculative financial crash. Tulip mania was an early forerunner of the South Sea bubble, and more recently, the dot-com boom and subprime mortgage crisis. More significantly, though, this virus-induced episode firmly established the Netherlands as a world center of botany and horticulture and shows. However, inadvertently, that the virus can sometimes help the survival prospect of its host species. Smallpox, A Poxviridae species Variola vera, rank 63. Uh, Humanity's most lethal viral killer. Janet Parker was an exceptionally unlucky woman. Her tragic death on 11 September 1978 marked the passing of a long and inauspicious era in the history of human disease. Only 6 weeks earlier, she had been infected by a rogue strain of smallpox virus, Variola major, that had escaped through an air vent from an unregulated research laboratory beneath her photographic studio in a university campus building in Birmingham, England. Parker, aged 40, was the last victim of the smallpox virus. Within only 2 years of her death, the World Health Organization officially declared the disease extinct in nature, the first and only case of the natural infection being totally eradicated by collective human endeavor. Despite its recent extinction, smallpox has been one of humanity's most lethal viral killers. The disease passes easily through the air between one human and another whenever they are about 2 meters or less apart. Typically, about 30% of those infected subsequently die. Also, in some outbreaks, the rate increases to near 100%. Cumulatively, this disease has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people. Variola infects only humans. It began as a mutant strain that originated in another member of the Poxviridae family. Cowpox, uh, cowpox and monkeypox are non-lethal infections that can affect both humans and other animals. At some point after humans started keeping farm animals about 10,000 years ago, a variant jumped the species barrier from cows to humans and evolved into a lethal new strain. Poxviridae do not hijack the nucleus of the host cell to replicate. Instead, they use their own double-stranded DNA as copying machinery, only helping themselves to their host cell's cytoplasm as a source of body-building protein. This unique behavior has led some uh, biologists to hypothesize that at the very early stage in the evolution of life on Earth, a pox-like virus invaded the simple bacterial cells, prokaryotes, seeding them with a nucleus of DNA. If so, the effect that the ancient ancestors of smallpox virus had on life on Earth were monumental. Their vital impact may therefore have been to provide the essential DNA genetic copying machinery that has made all forms of higher life possible. Death by smallpox was extremely unpleasant. Signs of trouble emerged about 12 days after the infection. Huge numbers of Infected viral particles then spread through the bloodstream to all parts of the victim's body. High fever, muscle pain, headaches, and vomiting gave way to a pernicious rash, usually inside the mouth, on the tongue, down the throat, and all over the face. Rupturing blisters oozed copious doses of virus infection into the saliva. 2 days later, the rash spread all over the body, usually bursting out into large leaking pustules that eventually scabmed over. If the disease itself failed to kill its host, other infections such as bronchitis or pneumonia soon took over. The most fortunate survivors, like Queen Elizabeth I of England, were usually left with lifelong scars, in her case covered up with thick drops of white-lead makeup. Others went permanently blind. Understanding the enormous impact that this disease has had on human society is only possible where good historical records survive. One of the most ancient accounts is from Greek historian Thucydides, who described the plague of Athens that decimated the city's population in 430 BC. From his account, it seems almost certain that smallpox epidemic contributed significantly to this Spartan victory and the famous Peloponnesian Wars. By 250 BC, clear evidence emerges of smallpox infection in China, possibly spread by Central Asian hands. Frequent outbreaks followed in succeeding centuries, and by the 6th century, it had spread from Korea to Japan via Buddhist monks. Urbanization in Japan from 710, with the building of the imperial capital of Nara, helped the disease spread, where it wiped out the ruling Fujiwara family, and from c. 735 became endemic, permanent in society. One result was that the Japan Buddhist religious fervor grew more intense in a desperate attempt to revive the empire of this appalling pestilence. In Africa, the disease long plagued the dynasties of ancient pharaohs, claiming the life of Ramesses V in 1157 BC, whose mummy has recently been examined, revealing a rash of raised pustules. It spread from there to the Middle East by the Hittite Empire in Turkey. In c.A.D. 550, a mostly Christian army from Ethiopia invaded Yemen, reaching as far as Mecca in A.D. 570, the year of the birth of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Then smallpox struck. The vastly outnumbered but infection-free Arabs were easily able to fight off the deceased Christians in a conflict known as the Elephant War. The virus traveled with the Muslim warriors who pushed on into Spain. Through the Middle East and even across the hot, dusty Saharan desert into the plains of West Africa, smallpox had its greatest impact several hundred years later, carried by the 16th century. newcomers to the Americas, the Spanish conquistadors, they were soon followed by West African slaves, shipped across the Atlantic to work in the plantations of the New World. Both waves of immigrants brought smallpox to the Americas, virtually annihilating the Native American populations who had no immunity to the disease, because traditionally none had lived in close proximity to farm animals. 100 years after the fall of the native Central and South American empires, the disease struck North America, this time spread by French settlers in Nova Scotia. An epidemic starting in 1670 wiped out much of the Native American population along the East Coast within just a few years. By the time the Pilgrim Fathers arrived from England on the Mayflower in 1621, 9/10 of the indigenous East Coast population had died. Not that the European settlers were totally immune. About 20 of those of the Mayflower also succumbed to the disease. The first glimmer of a human fight back came in 1717, largely thanks to an enlightened English feminist. While living in Turkey, Lady Mary Montagu, wife of the British ambassador to Istanbul, wrote a series of letters describing life in and around the court of the Ottoman Emperor. In one of them, she described the method of inoculation against smallpox. It is thought to have been pioneered in ancient India under the auspices of Hindu mystic who had their own goddess of smallpox, Shtalamata. The process involves some powdered scum taken from a previously infected person who had recovered from the less virulent form of the disease, variola minor. This was inserted into a small incision made in the skin of an uninfected person, provoking a mild form of the disease. Usually, the process provided lifelong immunity. Also, it wasn't without it wasn't without risk. Lady Montagu was determined to lead the way, and 1721 she had both her children inoculated, the first such procedure ever performed in England. While inoculation provided some protection from the disease, it wasn't until 1796 that the genuinely safe process was discovered by which immunity could be conferred without risk to doctor or patient. By injecting pus from a cowpox blister into a healthy human, Edward Jenner, a doctor from Gloucestershire, England, found a new method of immunization. He called it vaccination, from Latin vacca for cow. Cowpox caused a mild and temporary skin infection in humans that the body's immune system has no problem controlling. If someone who has already had cowpox is later infected by smallpox, the body can successfully attack the disease because the viruses are so similar that it is tricked into thinking that the smallpox infection is the recurrence of cowpox. Immunity is almost always assured. About 175 years passed between Janet's discovery and the death of Janet Parker. In that short period, hundreds of millions of people continued to die from the disease until its eventual eradication, certified in 1980. Today, Only 2 laboratories in the world are officially permitted to keep live samples of the virus for research in case of future outbreak. Also, to what extent, as the samples are held in secret by countries that were once part of its former Soviet Union remains unclear. Bye.